I've watched a lot of bad anime on this channel, but there's something about Beast Tamer which just hurts in a unique way. There are so many individual decisions within it that just bother me, all of which are connected to the central problem, which is the intrinsic horror of the core premise. Beast Tamer is a native isekai, a fantasy story set in a world which works on video game JRPG logic. It's about a man named Rein whose class is Beast Tamer getting kicked out of an adventuring party because the party doesn't value him. He then meets a beast girl named Kanade who he proceeds to tame using beast taming magic, and he goes on an adventure with her where he proceeds to tame a whole bunch of other monster girls. To anyone whose brain hasn't yet been poisoned, that might have gone by you a little bit fast, so let me break that down a second time. This man has the power to make contracts with animals and bind them to his will, and this is an anime about him forming a ragtag group of superpowered friends by using that magic on a bunch of cute girls with animal body parts, all of whom proceed to call him the good ol' B left bracket D asterisk D left bracket YXJ. And isn't there something about that just hits you a little bit different? It's so mask-off about the fact that it's just wish fulfillment, and honestly, I would praise it for its earnestness there if it wasn't for the fact that it's so deeply insecure to the point that it doesn't even fully commit to the wish fulfillment. You've heard of porn with a plot, but this is porn that's just the plot. See, I actually think that the writing needed for pornography is kind of interesting. It demands a very different set of skills and narrative conventions to write for eroticism as opposed to writing for drama or comedy. Like, for example, when this show's first episode has a long scene of them forming a contract so that he can tame her, it doesn't do much of anything for the plot. The plot would stay the same with barely any changes if they simply became friends, right? He really just treats her as an adventuring partner from here on out. So dedicating so much time to this scene makes no sense. But them forming this weird master-slave dynamic would make sense if this were a porno and the author was trying to play to a fetish. That's the kind of story where this writing would make sense. It'd be a necessary setup for the eroticism to work as intended. But not only do these two never do it with each other, there's not even that much fan service done with the story. Like, yeah, their boobs are on screen, but the girls don't have these dedicated, softcore fan service scenes like a lot of isekais have. For all this show is concerned, it's a fantasy action show with some cute girls. But there's also just this hentai plot element taking up an inordinate amount of the oxygen in the room, and it's just so blindingly stupid. Another example is how they meet the second girl in episode 3. There's a person on a bridge who keeps picking fights with people, so they go over and fight her, and then he tames her at her request. And that's, like, weird, right? Normally when you bring in a new girl in one of these stories, you have some dramatic conflict surrounding them with some amount of intrigue and world building. You have some bad guys to save the girl from, or some greater threat to team up to defeat. You're usually in some new locale, or dealing with some political situation, or something like that. But the dramatic conflict chosen for introducing the Dragon Girl is almost comically straightforward. Just beating her in a fight so she can become the next member of the harem. There's barely anything to resolve, anything to triumph over, and this is a wish fulfillment show. Isn't triumph the entire point? This plot would make a lot of sense if it was just an excuse to get to the next sex scene. That would make it actually very tight writing. But there isn't a sex scene to rush to. There's just the fantasy plot that this story is forgetting it's supposed to have. It's porn without any sex. Okay, so I know that I usually frame my 3-episode tests around some kind of plot synopsis, but the plot here is so vacuous that there's almost not a point of going at things chronologically, but there are a number of scenes that I think are worth talking about. However, before we do that, I'd like to remind you to like and leave a comment. If you want to see more videos, subscribe and hit the bell, and consider supporting me on Patreon, the link is in the description. Let's start with the arm wrestling contest. After forming his contract with Kanade, Rein and her go to a local inn where someone spots Kanade. He knows that beast girls are pretty rare and pretty strong, so he takes it upon himself to sally up to the two of them and boast about how Rein looks like a wimp compared to him and that Kanade should be hanging out with him instead. This is a classic for action series with strong romantic subplots, right? It allows us to show off how badass the protagonist is while also having him impress Milady, but it winds up going all wrong. See, this asshole offers an arm wrestling contest against Rein with Kanade on the line, you know, because she's a chattel slave, apparently. If we look at this realistically, there is only one reasonable response to this. To say no. Ignoring the fact that Rein doesn't even get anything if he wins, it's also disrespecting the autonomy of his new friend. Like, entering this would be a very serious slight against her. He agrees to participate without consulting her, she never gets mad about this. Now we, the audience, know why he had to do this. He's the self-insert. His masculinity was threatened, and so the story needs him to show this guy up. But there are lots of ways he could do that. He could go around the challenge and just beat the guy up. He could be a total feminist about it and have Kanade beat him up. He could do some clever thing where he uses animals he's tamed to mess with him and embarrass this guy. There's all sorts of things you could do. But no, he just goes with the arm wrestling contest. And he has an internal monologue about how he doesn't care what this guy thinks, but wants him to not bother Kanade in the future, which beating him would apparently prevent. It's just the dumbest excuse on the show's part. In the end, all of this is just to reveal that being bonded with Kanade gave him super strength, something he didn't know till then. Incredible! This means he went in with no game plan. But I think the worst part about this is that it's missing half the equation. See, scenes like this are a way of the protagonist asserting dominance, but they're also a way of impressing the cute girl he's with. If you want an example of this being done well, look no further than Akito the Exiled. The female lead, Layla, is at a gala with the male lead, Akito, who is serving as her bodyguard / terminally edgy love interest. Someone of high status comes up to harass her, but when he puts his hand on her, Akito proceeds to overstep his social bounds by spilling a drink on him to provoke him and then winning easily in the ensuing fight.
Here. Sorry about that little spill.
He then grabs Layla's hand and suavely guides her somewhere else for them to drink in peace. The thing that makes this work is because it isn't just a contrived series of excuses for Akito to act manly. It's a contrived series of excuses for him to act romantically manly. By putting yourself in Layla's shoes, you can comprehend how this would make her heart race. This guy stood up for her. He put a man who was insulting her in his place, proceeded to act suave with her after. It all sells the idea that she was susceptible to this. I mean, I'm not even that into guys, and I'm susceptible to this. But put yourself in Kanade's shoes, and you get none of that. You get a guy ignoring your boundaries, treating you like an object to be gambled, and making no particularly romantic gestures. He's not even using her as an object in a sexy, dark romance way either. He's just sort of doing it passively because, you know, she's a chattel slave, and yet regardless, she is impressed by this. Her feelings, her agency as a real person are being so ignored that the wish fulfillment no longer involves empathizing with her. Her affection towards the protagonist is not something we're supposed to understand, it's simply something we're meant to see and take note of. We have refined the science of objectifying women for the sake of wish fulfillment so far that the wish fulfillment itself has become hollow. Next up, let's talk about the inciting incident of the story, Rein being kicked out of the hero's party. So, this guy here is the hero. In this case, hero is a rough translation of the Japanese word yusha, which as I understand means hero less in the sense of someone heroic, and more means hero in the sense of the hero's journey. It's a title often given to the protagonist of an epic or a JRPG. Since Beast Tamer is set in a world which vaguely riffs on that of the typical JRPG, the hero in this case is being used as a shorthand for the notion of a JRPG protagonist, which, yes, means that there is a protagonist for the setting who isn't the protagonist of the story, which is very confusing if you aren't used to this kind of thing. It might be a bit easier if you think of this guy not as the protagonist, but instead as the chosen one. Within the world of Beast Tamer, this blonde jackass is destined for great things. He's probably supposed to kill some demon lord or whatever. On the surface, that might sound kind of interesting. A story which exists to deconstruct and analyze the storytelling conventions of classical myth and contemporary pop epics. But there is a problem. Those conventions were deconstructed a long time ago. Beast Tamer is just playing around with the pieces still left on the floor. Plenty of other stories before Beast Tamer have set themselves in mock JRPG fantasy worlds with a class system, and a chosen one, and adventuring parties which have to register in an adventuring guild. And some of them did so in order to satirize those very tropes, but Beast Tamer has no interest in doing so. Rather than calling attention to these broad generic tropes so that they can be analyzed, it calls on them so that they can be utilized. The plot doesn't exist to satirize the notion of a hero's adventuring party. The plot would have stayed almost exactly the same if this were any old group of fantastical warriors. This recognizable trope was directly name-dropped, not so that attention could be called to it, but simply because the hero's party needs no introduction. All of the target audience, having grown up on JRPGs and stories which ostensibly satirize JRPGs, are familiar with the hero's party, and so the author doesn't need to put in any legwork to world build an actual group of people. And that is what makes the way in which the hero and his party act so jarring and almost insulting. They talk down to Rein with a level of callousness and blunt derision that is almost surreal. Like, this is how my anxiety tells me people are going to talk to me. I'm not denying that there are people in this world capable of this level of cruelty, but it's not earned. We don't understand anything about these characters. This is the first scene. And isn't that kind of weird from the hero's party? Like, if you were to subvert expectations and have the apparent good guys be evil, you'd want to build up to it, right? The idea of subversion, the aesthetic facade of having some sort of thing to say about existing tropes, is being used as a cheap smokescreen to disguise the fact that the author didn't put thought into this. It's a lazy setup for a bog-standard revenge story, and it's just using the idea of, oh man, what if the chosen one was a dick, because that sort of subversive usage of tropes has been trendy for a few years at this point. And all of this is made worse by the fact that Rein isn't useless. And yeah, I get that that's the point of the story, that they undervalued Rein, but they undervalued him in the most unbelievable of ways. For example, up until this point, Rein had mostly been used to carry luggage and scout ahead, and they felt that he was too much of a burden in fights to justify carrying him into dangerous regions like the one that they wanted to tackle next. But in a later episode, we see them coming back from that area defeated and upset. Now that they don't have someone to do the scouting for them and they need to carry all their luggage themselves, they're seeing how hard it is without Rein, but like, you're kidding me, right? So let me get this straight. I'm supposed to simultaneously buy the notion that these four people have enough tactical knowledge and battlefield experience to consistently take on very dangerous situations, and they still haven't figured out the importance of information and logistics? This is a level of cockiness on their part which can only be explained by complete and utter idiocy, but fine, maybe that's their character. But that doesn't explain what happens next. When they return from their mission defeated, they all come to the conclusion that they're going to need Rein for it. So the next step is obvious, right? They go out and get Rein back into their team, but he's already moved on. That would be enough. That would be a fun story. But you see, that would be far too human of a response to this situation. What they instead do is form a conniving plot where they'll get him to join them for this mission and then ditch him again after the mission. Forget about how smart or dumb they are, there is nothing self-serving about this plot. The thing which would be most in their interest would be to just get Rein back and keep him around because they now know the importance of someone who can handle scouting and the transportation of goods. It would still make them bad people who don't care about Rein, but I guess plotting to rekindle a friendship for pragmatic reasons wasn't Machiavellian enough, so they add in a pointless layer of cruelty which obviously is going to bite them in the ass later even if their plan works. Because you see, the story that's being told isn't about how these characters were wrong about Rein. It's about how they suck and how Rein is a Chad. Right after Rein leaves them, he's given a bunch of praise by all the people in his life who already thought he was cool and thought that those four were dicks. That he is cool isn't a lesson Rein has to learn. He doesn't need to grow past self-doubt. The story is just about showing us that he's the cool one, actually. I mean, really consider the fact that Rein gets super strength from a plot contrivance in episode 2. If this really were a show about how the hero's party was wrong for getting rid of him, if it was really about how they were too dumb to see what he added to the team, then surely the rest of the show would be about how useful scouting and transporting goods are. But no, he punches things into submission. And when punching things doesn't work, he succeeds by summoning a beast who conveniently has some incredibly powerful paralytic poison, which I guess he can just do. Yeah, very useless in a fight, this guy. I'm sure the hero's party was very unimpressed by him constantly incapacitating enemies with powerful debuffs. It's dumb. I made fun of it earlier, but you could tell a story about 4 entitled assholes who don't understand how important party members who play support roles can be. But that's not what this is about. This is about how Rein is the bee's knees, and how these guys suck, and how all these cute girls really want to become Rein's chattel slaves for some reason. This show brings me pain. If you want to compensate me for my injuries, then do the like and subscribe stuff, Patreon and all that. I want my sanity back.